Difficulties encountered when running mandrels through long radius sweeps and concrete encased ductbanks can stem from several key issues. Firstly, egg shape in the sweeps can impede mandrel passage. This distortion might arise from improper installation practices, environmental pressures after the pour, or inherent material defects present in the sweep itself. Secondly, gumming between the coupling and the sweep represents another potential obstruction. If the connection between pipe segments and the sweep isn't adequately sealed against intrusion, dirt, debris, or even concrete slurry can infiltrate the joint, creating a barrier that prevents the mandrel from moving freely. Thirdly, the type of polyvinyl chloride, or PVC, material used plays a crucial role. Some PVC formulations, like Cantex, have been banned in certain regions due to their susceptibility to deformation. If such a material was used, the sweeps might have deformed into an egg shape more readily under the weight of the concrete. Fourthly, insufficient lubrication dramatically increases the friction between the mandrel and the pipe's interior surface. Without adequate lubrication, the force needed to push the mandrel through can exceed what's practically achievable, especially in long runs. To address these issues, a multifaceted approach is recommended. 1. Implement rigorous inspections before burial. Prior to encasing any sweeps or elbows in concrete, conduct a thorough visual inspection. Look for any signs of irregularities, such as an oval or egg shape, dents, or other deformities that could potentially hinder mandrel passage. 2. Ensure correct mandrel size. Select a mandrel with a diameter appropriate for the specific size of the conduit. Avoid oversized mandrels, as forcing them through can damage the conduit, further exacerbating the problem. 3. Lubricate properly. Apply a generous amount of non-solidifying lubricant to both the mandrel and the interior surface of the pipe. This will significantly reduce friction, making it easier to push the mandrel through. Avoid using soap or oil-based lubricants, as they can solidify or otherwise clog the pipe. 4. Consider adjusting mandrel size. If feasible, slightly reduce the diameter of the mandrel's largest rings. This can provide the necessary clearance to navigate tight spots, such as those often found in sweeps. 5. Explore alternative methods. If traditional mandreling proves impossible, explore alternative methods for verifying the ductbank's integrity. A balloon mandrel, which inflates to fill the duct, can detect obstructions. Alternatively, a camera inspection can provide a visual assessment of the duct's interior. 6. Contact the pipe manufacturer. Consult with the manufacturer of the PVC pipe used in the installation. They may have specific recommendations for mandreling procedures, or be aware of any potential material-related issues that could contribute to the problem. By carefully considering these potential causes and implementing these suggested solutions, you can significantly increase your chances of successfully mandreling buried concrete encased ductbanks. If you still have difficulty, the following points address the topic further. Consider using a split mandrel. A split mandrel consists of 2 or more segments that are hinged or otherwise connected so that they can conform to variations in the inside diameter of the conduit. This type of mandrel is especially useful for navigating sweeps and bends. Another thing to keep in mind is to make sure that the mandrel is designed for the type of conduit being used. For example, a mandrel designed for rigid metal conduit, or RMC, may not be suitable for use with PVC conduit. The RMC mandrel is usually made of metal and the PVC mandrel is usually made of PVC or plastic. Using the incorrect mandrel can cause damage to the conduit. Next, use multiple mandrels. If the ductbank is long or has multiple bends, it may be helpful to use multiple mandrels connected in series. This will help to distribute the force required to pull the mandrels through the ductbank and reduce the risk of the mandrels getting stuck. Then apply heat to the conduit. If the conduit is cold, it may become more difficult to pass the mandrel through it. Warming the conduit will make it more pliable and easier to work with. Warming can be done with a heat gun, but be careful not to overheat the conduit, which can damage it. Another thing you can do is use a pulling eye. A pulling eye is a device that is attached to the end of the mandrel and used to pull it through the ductbank. The pulling eye should be sized appropriately for the mandrel and the ductbank. In addition, the pulling eye should be strong enough to withstand the force required to pull the mandrel through the ductbank. It is also important to ensure that the pulling eye is properly attached to the mandrel. Next, use a winch. A winch is a mechanical device that is used to pull the mandrel through the duct bank. The winch should be sized appropriately for the mandrel and the duct bank. The winch should be strong enough to withstand the force required to pull the mandrel through the duct bank. It is also important to ensure that the winch is properly anchored and that the cable is properly attached to the pulling eye. You can also use a lubricant specifically designed for use with PVC conduit. These lubricants are typically silicone-based and will not damage the conduit. Applying the lubricant to the mandrel on the inside of the conduit will make it easier to pass the mandrel through. And then, you can also try to use a larger mandrel. If you are having difficulty passing a smaller mandrel through the duct bank, you may need to use a larger mandrel. However, be careful not to use a mandrel that is too large, as this can damage the conduit. Before selecting a larger mandrel, check the specifications for the conduit to ensure that the mandrel will fit properly. Next, use compressed air. Compressed air can be used to push the mandrel through the duct bank. To do this, attach an air compressor to one end of the duct bank and insert the mandrel into the other end. Then, turn on the air compressor and allow the air to push the mandrel through the duct bank. Be careful not to use too much air pressure, as this can damage the conduit. This can be dangerous and should only be performed by experienced professionals. Remember to follow safety precautions. When working with duct banks, it is important to follow all safety precautions. This includes wearing appropriate personal protective equipment, such as gloves, safety glasses, and a hard hat. It is also important to be aware of the potential hazards associated with working with duct banks, such as electrical shock and cave-ins. Finally, consider the location. The location of the duct bank can also affect the difficulty of passing a mandrel through it. For example, a duct bank that is located in a wet area will be more difficult to work with than a duct bank that is located in a dry area. Consider the environment when working with duct banks. Another point to consider is the number of bends. The number of bends in a duct bank can also affect the difficulty of passing a mandrel through it. A duct bank with many bends will be more difficult to work with than a duct bank with few bends. Sweeps are generally long radius. Next, consider the length of the duct bank. The length of the duct bank can also affect the difficulty of passing a mandrel through it. A long duct bank will be more difficult to work with than a short duct bank. The material of the mandrel is also important. Mandrels are typically made of steel, aluminum, or plastic. Steel mandrels are the strongest and most durable, but they are also the heaviest. Aluminum mandrels are lighter than steel mandrels, but they are not as strong. Plastic mandrels are the lightest, but they are also the least durable. Consider the size of the rings on the mandrel. The rings in the mandrel should be slightly smaller than the inside diameter of the conduit. This will allow the mandrel to pass through the conduit easily. If the rings are too large, they will get stuck in the conduit. The shape of the mandrel is also important. Mandrels are typically cylindrical or spherical. Cylindrical mandrels are easier to pull through straight sections of conduit. Spherical mandrels are better for navigating bends in the conduit. When selecting a mandrel, it is important to consider the type of conduit that you are working with, the number of bends in the conduit, the length of the conduit, the material of the mandrel, the size of the rings in the mandrel, and the shape of the mandrel. By considering these factors, you can select the best mandrel for the job. Another thing to look out for is debris inside the conduit. Sometimes debris can get inside the conduit and obstruct the path of the mandrel. This debris can include dirt, sand, rocks, and other materials. To remove debris from the conduit, you can use a vacuum cleaner, a water hose, or compressed air. Be sure to remove all of the debris before attempting to pass the mandrel through the conduit again. If you are unable to remove the debris, you may need to excavate the conduit and remove the section that is blocked. If the conduit is cracked, this can also make it difficult to pass the mandrel through it. Cracks can occur due to a number of factors, including age, weathering, and impact. If you find a crack in the conduit, you will need to repair it before attempting to pass the mandrel through it. There are a number of different ways to repair cracks in conduit. One option is to use a patching compound. Patching compound is a thick, putty-like material that can be used to fill in cracks. Another option is to use a sealant. Sealant is a liquid material that can be used to seal cracks. If the crack is large, you may need to replace the section of conduit. Finally, the age of the conduit is important. Over time, conduit can become brittle and difficult to work with. If you are working with old conduit, it is important to be extra careful. You may need to use a lubricant to help the mandrel pass through the conduit. You may also need to use a smaller mandrel. If you are still having trouble passing the mandrel through the conduit, you may need to call a professional. A professional electrician or contractor will have the tools and experience necessary to get the job done safely and efficiently. Sometimes the problem is just the brand of conduit that was used. Some brands of conduit are more difficult to work with than others. If you are consistently having trouble with a particular brand of conduit, you may want to switch to a different brand. It is also important to make sure that the conduit is properly supported. If the conduit is not properly supported, it can sag and bend, making it difficult to pass the mandrel through it. Conduit should be supported at regular intervals, typically every 3 to 5 feet, depending on the size and type of conduit. Supports can be made of metal, plastic, or wood. The support should be securely attached to the conduit and to the structure that is supporting it. Also, ensure proper alignment of the conduit sections. If the conduit sections are not properly aligned, this can also make it difficult to pass the mandrel through it. When connecting conduit sections, be sure to use the proper fittings. Fittings should be tightened securely but not over-tightened. Over-tightening can damage the fittings and make it difficult to disassemble the conduit sections later on. Furthermore, consider temperature variations. Temperature variations can also affect the difficulty of passing a mandrel through conduit. Conduit expands and contracts with temperature changes. If the conduit is installed in an area that experiences significant temperature variations, it is important to allow for expansion and contraction. This can be done by using expansion fittings. Expansion fittings are designed to allow conduit to move without putting stress on the conduit or the fittings. In addition, proper bending techniques help. Improper bending techniques can also make it difficult to pass a mandrel through conduit. When bending conduit, it is important to use the proper tools and techniques. The bend should be smooth and gradual. Sharp bends can damage the conduit and make it difficult to pass the mandrel through it. When in doubt, consult with a qualified electrician or contractor. Working with conduit can be challenging. If you are not comfortable working with conduit, it is best to consult with a qualified electrician or contractor. A qualified electrician or contractor will have the tools, experience, and knowledge necessary to get the job done safely and efficiently. Always check local codes and regulations. Before starting any electrical work, it is important to check local codes and regulations. Electrical codes and regulations vary from place to place. It is important to make sure that you are following all applicable codes and regulations. These resources can provide valuable information and assistance. Furthermore, consider future maintenance. When installing conduit, it is important to consider future maintenance. Conduit should be installed in a way that allows for easy access for maintenance and repairs. Conduit should also be protected from damage. This can be done by using conduit covers and guards. Also consider the location of the couplings. Sometimes, the location of the couplings can make it difficult to pass a mandrel through the conduit. Couplings are used to connect two sections of conduit. If the couplings are not properly aligned or if they are too tight, they can create an obstruction that makes it difficult to pass the mandrel through the conduit. When installing couplings, be sure to align them properly and tighten them securely, but not over-tighten them. If you are having trouble passing the mandrel through a coupling, you may need to loosen the coupling or remove it altogether. Finally, consider the type of mandrel being used. There are different types of mandrels available. Some mandrels are designed for use with specific types of conduit. Be sure to use the correct type of mandrel for the type of conduit that you are working with. Also, consider the size of the mandrel. Mandrels come in different sizes. Be sure to use a mandrel that is the correct size for the conduit. If the mandrel is too large, it will be difficult to pass through the conduit. If the mandrel is too small, it will not be able to clean the conduit properly.